Diane Yvonne Murrell Herbert, also known as Auntie D, of North Carolina, USA, who resided at Croton Drive, Montparnasse, St. George, and White Plains, New York, in the USA, passed away on Friday, 17th March 2023, at the age of 73, left to mourn her husband Alan Herbert, beloved pet Happy Herbert, sisters and brother Marilyn Cassandra Murrell, Evelyn Boyd, Joyce Andrews, and Ricky Sparrow, all residing in the USA. Mother-in-law Agnes Herbert. Many nieces, nephews, cousins, in-laws, close friends, church and spiritual family members, and neighbors of the Croton Drive, Montparnasse area, far too numerous to mention. The funeral of the late Diane Yvonne Murrell Herbert, also known as Auntie D, of North Carolina, USA, who resided at Croton Drive, Montparnasse, and White Plains, New York, USA, will take place on Wednesday, 29th March at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at Bailey's Chapel, Coronage, St. George's, followed by private interment. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Junior Jason Houston of Trinidad, who resided at Lower Coast Guard, St. Mark, passed away on Saturday, 18th March 2023, at the age of 45. He was the son of Lema Houston of Coast Guard, grandson of Wilma Charles in the United Kingdom, nephew of Moland Frederick and Diane Houston in the UK, and Louisa Augustine. Many relatives including Maudlin Braffett, Claude Alexander, Arga Alexander, Nicholas Young, Dora St. Bernard, Dorette Bowler, Basil Alexander, Stacey Peters, Michael Frederick, Vero and Asher Augustine in Grenada, Dennis Frederick, Collins Alexander in Trinidad, Alan Alexander, Suzanne McIntosh, Cyprian Bowler and Raphael John in the USA, Aaliyah Houston, Ian Alexander, and Leroy Augustine in the United Kingdom. Many other family and friends including Cynthia Bonaparte, Teresa Edwards, Stephen Frederick, Aston Tika, Rosalind Crosby, Ursula Phillip, Merle James, Samuel Phillip, the Alexander, Bonaparte, Houston, James, Julian, Augustine, Philip, and Barry families, and friends and neighbors of Coast Guard and surrounding areas. The funeral service for the late Junior Jason Houston of Trinidad, who resided at Lower Coast Guard, St. Mark, will take place on Thursday, March 30th at 2 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the St. Mark the Evangelist Catholic Church, Victoria, and interment will be at the Coast Guard Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Anne Monica Francis, also known as Tanti Anne, of Laurelland, St. David, passed away on Friday, 10th March 2023, at the age of 65. She was the mother of Kenny Francis, also known as Ken, Kellen Francis, Curlon Francis, and Andel Francis. Grandmother of 14, including Kiomel, Jahim, Kiana, Kerlona, Kahim, Kareem, Kali, Kishona, Kyla, Caden, and Jaquan. Sister of Royston Francis, also known as Guy, Gracie Francis Telesford, Denise Catherine Francis, Osbert Francis, also known as Browncoat, Winston Francis, also known as Scratch, Elizabeth Francis, also known as Lizzie, Peter Angus Francis, also known as Angie, and Benedict Williams. Niece of Doris, John, Cynthia, and Hamilton Licorice. Aunt of 31, including Catasia, Nympha, Lisa, Candia, Kizzy, Arisha, Brent, Stefan, Kenyon, Oswin, and AJ. Mother-in-law of Tanisha Francis. Sister-in-law of Doreen Francis and David Telesford. Caregivers Miss Dessa and Belinda. Many other relatives and friends including the Francis and James families of Pedmotar, Bokati and siblings of Laurelland, the Leslie family of St. Paul's, Clement Gabriel and siblings of Pedmotar, the Gilbert family of Petit Bucay, the Licorice family of Corinth and Providence, Pastor Selwyn and Sister Angela Haling and members of the Garden of Prayer, the Blackett family of Beaton, Anthony Telesford, Dr. Devon Francis, Nurse Cox, co-workers at the SSU camp, Tasha, Sandra, Joy, Dominic, Joan Cutane, and neighbors and friends of Laurelland and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Anne Monica Francis, also known as Tanti Anne, of Laurelland, St. David, will take place on Friday, March 31st at 1:30 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Garden of Prayer, St. Paul's, and entombment will be at the Mount Airy Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lackwell Brothers Funeral Home. Asher McIntyre of Mount Hartman, Grandon, St. George, died on Monday, March 6, 2023, at the age of 32. He was the son of Deborah McIntyre residing in the USA and Sylvan McIntyre, retired Superintendent of Police and former National Coordinator of NADMA. Brother of Ali in the USA, Aiden in Germany, attached to the U.S. Air Force, and Surag. Grandson of Benedict McIntyre. Brother-in-law of Sasha Victor McIntyre residing in the USA. Nephew of Grace Garraway in the U.S., Remy Peters, Cynthia Victor, Patsy, Charmaine and Ann Blackett, Anthea George, Rosalind Bell in Aruba, Decima and Sally Ann Noel in the USA, Bishop Eric Joseph in the U.S., Ken Joseph, Godfrey Frederick, Justin, Cuthbert and Pastor Arthur Blackett, and Christopher and Anthony Blackett residing in the USA. Many relatives and friends including Pauline and Dawn Peters, Shalisha Blackett, Caleb, Glenisha, Max, Cassie, Sabrina, Avanel and Thera, the basketball brothers of the Caronage, Grandance and Laborie, the Blackett and Peters families of Beaton and in the U.S., the McIntyre families in Grenada, the USA, Canada, Jamaica and Trinidad, the George family of Westerhall, the Hector family of St. Paul's, the Gabriel family of St. David, the management and staff of Best of Grenada, Radisson Beach Resort, Custom Brokers and Port Authority, the communities of Mount Hartman, Grandance and Beaton. Many other family and friends, far too numerous to mention. The funeral service for the late Asher McIntyre of Mount Hartman, Grandon, St. George will take place on Monday, April 3rd, with viewing at 11 a.m. and tributes beginning at 12:30 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Gateway Assembly, Pont-Celine, St. George, and entombment will be at the Grandon Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Phyllis Ann Charles of Calavini passed away on Monday, 13th March 2023, at the age of 63. She was the mother of Kevin Charles, also known as Yellow, and Brandon Charles, also known as Tafari, grandmother of Kezzy Charles and Angel Charles, sister of Marcia and Sherry Cador, Sandra Cador Connaught, Antoinette and Lisa Cador, Bronte Boyce, and Brondell Charles, aunt of Randy Connaught Jr., Andrew James, Kim Nasha Cador, Roshan Connaught, Brianna James, Javern, Stephanie, and Elisa Cador, sister-in-law of ACP Randy Connaught, niece of Veronica Maffio, Eileen, Joel, and Alston Cador. Many relatives and friends including Rebecca Belgrave, Lillian Sylvester, Rita Charles, Julietta Simmons, Chiffon Catherine Cador, the Cador family of Mount Plaisir, Grand Roy, Concord, and Beaulieu, the Charles family of Marianne, and friends and neighbours of Calavini and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Phyllis Ann Charles of Calavini St. George will take place on Tuesday, April 4th at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the St. George's Seventh-day Adventist Church, Archibald Avenue, and interment will be at the St. George's Centre Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lackwell Brothers Funeral Home. Doris Robert, also known as Mummy Doris of Subi St. Andrew, passed away on Friday, March 10th, 2023, at the age of 85. Left to cherish her memory are her children Maureen Peters and Frances Peters in St. Thomas, sisters Claire Clark, Augustina Cotto, and Claudette Collymore in Trinidad, brothers Paul Collymore, David Collymore, also known as Apo in New York, Matthew Collymore, also known as Murphy in Florida, Claudius Collymore, also known as Brooke in St. Croix, and Fitzroy Collymore, also known as Benman in the USA. 40 nieces and nephews, including Alroy Collymore, Rhonda Thomas, Alison Lazarus, and Leroy Ned, all in the USA, Michael Vincent in Canada, and Jennifer in Grenada. 26 grandchildren, including Katisha Peters, Kim Sean Peters, Sabrina Collymore, Salisha Lawrence, Kim Shaw Roach, and Brendan Peters, all in the United Kingdom, Nicole in Miami, Anisha Joseph in the USA, and Janisha St. Hilaire and Leroy Matthew, both in Grenada. 37 great-grands. 5 great-great-grands. Other relatives and friends including Rosalind Mason and family of Soubise, V.N. St. Hilaire and family of Hope, Jesse Braffett and family of Crowshoe, Sylvia MacDonald and family of Soubise, the Belfon and Peters families of Markey and Soubise, the Seeley family of Grandbra, the Shares family of Soubise, and all close relatives and friends of Soubise and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Doris Robert, also known as Mummy Doris of Soubise St. Andrew, will take place on Tuesday, April 4th at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Battle Hill Catholic Church, Grenville St. Andrew, and interment will be at the Grand Bras Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Martin Jude Berrott, also known as Bogath of Monktegay St. George, passed away on Tuesday, 14th March 2023, at the age of 67. He was the father of Camina, Trevor, and Junior, grandfather of Travis and Crystal, father-in-law of Dwight, brother of Helen, Bonston, Marcia, and Brian, nephew of Juliet, uncle of many including Matthew and Annette, many other relatives and friends including Maliv, and friends and neighbours of Monktegay and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Martin Jude Berrott, also known as Bogath of Monktegay St. George, will take place on Tuesday, April 4th at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Garden of Remembrance Funeral Chapel, Cemetery Hill, St. George's, according to open Bible rites, and interment will be at the Wilberforce Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Floyd Davis, also known as Cockleg, Trump, and Robin, of St. George Estate, Lamoud, St. George, a former employee of Gravel and Concrete, passed away on Tuesday, 11th March 2023, at the age of 64. Left to mourn are his children Kenson, Lennon, Janelle, Tyson and Riddick Simon, Chanel Gibbs, Akim Amedi, Christian Connaught, Kelson and Rena Gabriel. 15 grandchildren. Siblings Edwin Davis, Jesse Davis Cutane, Roland Davis, Louise George, Cecil Davis, Chanel Davis, Martin and James Frank. Uncle and aunt George Harris and Louisa Harris. Close friends Hazel and Simon, Edwin James, Jenna Batiste, former and current workers of Gravel and Concrete, and the Nixon family of Lamoud. Other relatives and friends including the Harris and Dowden families of Monkmoritz, the Gibbs family of Grand Aunts, the Ameri family of Willis, the Connaught family of Defoe, Nellis Gabriel, Nelson Thomas, the Peters family of Woodlands, Sharon Williams, Rasta Ali of Boca, Manu, the management of Moraine Distributors, Leslie Doyle, the Simon, Dolland, Belgrave and Lawrence families of Lamoud, and neighbours of Lamoud, St. George Estate and surrounding areas. The funeral of the late Floyd Davis, also known as Cockleg, Trump and Robin, of St. George Estate, Lamoud, St. George, a former employee of Gravel and Concrete, will take place on Wednesday, April 5th at 1 p.m. Funeral service will be held at the Beaulieu Seventh-day Adventist Church, and entombment will be at the Beaulieu Cemetery. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Darren Tyrrell Jude Kurt Etchell, also known as D. Block, of Grand Mole, St. George, who resided in Wallisburg and Walpole Island, Ontario, Canada, transitioned on Sunday, 3rd April 2022, at the age of 33. The memorial service for the late Darren Tyrrell Jude Kurt Etchell, also known as D. Block, of Grand Mole, St. George, who resided in Wallisburg and Walpole Island, Ontario, Canada, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Lincoln Williams, also known as Boots and Linky, of Hermitage St. Patrick, who resided at Grand Arms St. George, passed away on Saturday 25th March 2023 at the age of 76. The funeral arrangements for the late Lincoln Williams, also known as Boots and Linky, of Hermitage St. Patrick, who resided at Grand Arms St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Magdalene Claire Charles, also known as Tanti Claire of Bellevue St. George, a well-known market vendor, died on Sunday 26 March 2023 at the age of 82. The funeral arrangements for the late Magdalene Claire Charles, also known as Tanti Claire of Bellevue St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Dane Bartholomew Hayes, also known as Ashton of Caliste St. George, passed away on Saturday 25 March 2023 at the age of 60. The funeral arrangements for the late Dane Bartholomew Hayes, also known as Ashton of Caliste St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Cuthbert B. Alexis, also known as Baker and Cutty, of Richmond St. Andrew, passed away on Friday 24 March 2023 at the age of 82. The funeral arrangements for the late Cuthbert B. Alexis, also known as Baker and Cutty, of Richmond St. Andrew, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Jonathan Richards, also known as Not Nice and J, of Edward Street, Grove, St. John, passed away on Tuesday 21 March 2023 at the age of 28. The funeral arrangements for the late Jonathan Richards, also known as Not Nice and J, of Edward Street, Grove, St. John, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Linda Noel, also known as Becca, of Corinth, who resided at Mardi Gras St. David, passed away on Monday, March 20th, 2023, at the age of 65. The funeral arrangements for the late Linda Noel, also known as Becca, of Corinth, who resided at Mardi Gras St. David, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Carl Wilson of Springs, who resided at Point Celine St. George, proprietor of Point Celine Hotel or Fox Inn, passed away on Tuesday 21 March 2023 at the age of 77. The funeral arrangements for the late Carl Wilson of Springs, who resided at Point Celine St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Abigail Mary Sandy of the Villa St. George passed away on Monday, March 20th, 2023, at the age of 84. The funeral arrangements for the late Abigail Mary Sandy of the Villa St. George will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Edward Chase, also known as Robertson Redhead, Zip and Barber, of Beausejour St. George, passed away on Sunday, March 19th, 2023, at the age of 77. The funeral arrangements for the late Edward Chase, also known as Robertson Redhead, Zip and Barber, of Beausejour St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Marlene Ford, also known as Mammerts of Fontenoy St. George, passed away on Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 in the USA, at the age of 74. The funeral arrangements for the late Marlene Ford, also known as Mammerts, of Fontenoy St. George, will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home. Reginald Pear of Westerhall Point St. David passed away on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2023, at the age of 90. The funeral arrangements for the late Reginald Pear of Westerhall Point St. David will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Bailey's Funeral Home. Vernetta Anastasia Gilbert of Woodland St. George passed away on Sunday 12th March 2023 at the age of 66. The funeral arrangements for the late Vernetta Anastasia Gilbert of Woodland St. George will be given in a subsequent broadcast. Funeral arrangements entrusted to Lacqua Brothers Funeral Home.
The management and staff of MTV extend deepest condolences to those of you whose loved ones have passed on. Thank you for watching.
I am Godwill James, an MD and a member of Gateway Assembly. Medically, death is regarded as an end or a cessation of life. Different groups view death in different perspectives. While some regard death as a continuation of life, others view it as an infeeble form of life. As a Christian, we may want to view death as a separation of the soul from the body. So, whichever way one may view death, I want to say that may the gentle soul of the faithful departed rest in the bosom of the Lord. Amen.